My fiancée mocked my father's funeral while I was handling everything, so I called off the wedding publicly and left them speechless in shock. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one holding my family together, especially during the final years of my father's illness when every day felt like a countdown I wasn't ready for. Half my life became hospitals, medications, late-night drives, and the constant fear of hearing my phone ring at the wrong moment, and somewhere in the middle of all that, Mia appeared, warm smile, calm voice, and this almost effortless way of making me believe I wasn't carrying everything alone. I remember one night when I told her, "I don't know how much longer he has," and she put her hand on my back and whispered, "I admire you, you know, not every man shows up the way you do," and hearing that felt like someone finally seeing me instead of the weight I was dragging behind me. But slowly, almost quietly, little comments began slipping out when I talked about my father, things like, "You always sound heavy after seeing him," or "Can we talk about something less depressing tonight?" And the shift was so subtle I didn't know how to process it. I kept convincing myself it was stress, telling her, "I'm sorry, I know this is hard on you too," even though deep down I could feel a small bruise forming every time she pulled back from a conversation I desperately needed support in. And even when her tone turned sharper and she sighed whenever I brought up his condition, I forced myself to overlook it, clinging to the hope that the woman who comforted me in the beginning was still the real her. What I didn't realize back then was that these tiny fractures were warning signs, and the stability I thought I had with her was nothing more than a thin surface waiting to crack the moment life demanded more from her than she was willing to give. My father's health declined faster than any of us expected, and suddenly my days were carved into brutal patterns: work, hospital, home, repeat, until it felt like my entire world existed under fluorescent lights and the quiet hum of medical machines. I remember walking into Mia's apartment after another long night, still smelling like antiseptic, and before I could even sit down she sighed, "So, does this mean we're putting the wedding stuff on hold again?" As if my dad's life was an inconvenience carved into our calendar. I tried to soften my voice when I told her, "He's getting worse, Mia. I don't know how much time he has," and instead of comfort, she pressed her fingers to her temples and muttered, "Everything is about your family lately." The words hit me like a physical ache, but I swallowed it, telling myself she was overwhelmed, telling myself she cared beneath the frustration, because the alternative, that she didn't, felt too painful to accept. Even when my mother thanked me for handling the financial paperwork and the late-night updates, even when my siblings leaned on me for every decision, I could see Mia growing quieter, more distant, looking at me like I was choosing them over her. There were moments that still replay in my head, like one night at the hospital when the doctor explained a new complication, and I called Mia, hoping to hear her voice steadier than mine. But she answered with, "Can we talk later?" I'm at dinner with the girls, and the laughter in the background felt like another world I wasn't invited to anymore. I walked back into my father's room feeling cold, telling myself she didn't understand, not that she didn't care. Each day the tension stretched thinner, her patience shorter, and for the first time I felt a shadow of doubt pressing into my chest, wondering what would happen to us when things got even harder than this. My father passed away early on a quiet Tuesday morning, and even though we'd been bracing for it, the moment it happened something inside me just cracked in a way I couldn't hold together. I spent the next hours making calls, arranging paperwork, helping my mother breathe through her tears, and somewhere in that blur I texted Mia, "He's gone," expecting at least a moment of softness. Instead, she replied, "So, what does this mean for the wedding timeline? We're already behind." And reading that while standing outside the hospital, with the morning air cold against my face, felt like someone had punched the air out of my chest. When I called her later, trying to steady my voice as I said, "I need you with me this week," she exhaled sharply and muttered, "I just didn't think his death would derail everything." As I started organizing the funeral arrangements, choosing the casket, finalizing the service, coordinating relatives, Mia acted like each task was an interruption to her life rather than a moment of grief we should have shared. One afternoon, while I was picking out flowers with my mother, Mia texted, "Are we really doing all this? It's not like he was a celebrity." I froze, staring at the message, feeling both disbelief and shame wash over me. When I confronted her later that night, she laughed lightly and said, "I didn't mean it like that. You just get heavy about everything lately," as if the problem wasn't her cruelty but my grief. And yet, like an idiot who desperately wanted to believe the best in her, I brushed it off and told myself she was overwhelmed or trying to cope in her own way. I held on to the illusion that once the funeral passed, once the dust settled, she would show me the compassion she used to have. But the truth was already clawing its way to the surface, and I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The morning of the funeral felt unreal, like my body was moving before my mind could catch up, and when I stepped outside to meet Mia, the air was cold enough to sting my lungs. She stood by her car with her arms crossed, looking irritated, and the first thing she said wasn't "How are you holding up?" but, "Do we really have to be there so early? The whole day is going to be depressing enough." Her tone was sharp, impatient, and I remember staring at her, trying to convince myself I misheard because the alternative hurt too much. When I said quietly, "It's my father's funeral, Mia," she rolled her eyes and muttered, "I'm just saying, you promised today wouldn't drag on forever." The words hit me like a slap, but I swallowed it because I didn't have the strength to argue, not today, not when everything inside me was already tearing. On the drive there, she kept adjusting the mirror, complaining about her makeup smudging, and at one point she said, "I didn't sign up for this gloomy energy, you know." I stared out the window, feeling smaller with every mile we got closer to the church. When we arrived, my mother hugged me with trembling arms, and when she looked over my shoulder at Mia, her expression shifted, soft concern tightening into a question she didn't voice. Mia barely nodded at her before whispering to me, "Can we skip the family part after this? I don't want to get dragged into hours of condolences." Inside, the scent of lilies and old wooden pews wrapped around me, and for a moment I felt grounded, until I glanced at Mia and saw her tapping her foot, checking her phone, looking like she was counting down minutes instead of mourning the man who raised me. The divide between us widened with every breath. And somewhere beneath the grief, something colder began to form, a realization I wasn't ready to face but couldn't escape forever. The moment the service began, the room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that settles into your bones, and for a few minutes, I let myself believe Mia would understand the gravity of the moment. But as soon as we sat down, she leaned toward me and whispered, "Why does everything look so budget? Didn't the funeral home offer better decor?" Her voice wasn't even quiet enough, the couple in front of us stiffened, and I felt my stomach twist into something sharp and sickening. I whispered back, "Mia, please," but she just shrugged and pulled out her phone like she was sitting through a boring lecture. When she glanced at my father's framed photo, she muttered, "You really chose that picture," as if she were critiquing a menu design instead of honoring the man who raised me. While the pastor spoke about my father's kindness, I watched Mia roll her eyes, then tap out a message with manicured fingers. A few seconds later, her phone buzzed, and she let out a quiet laugh, an actual laugh, while my mother wiped tears off her cheeks only a few feet away. I leaned closer and asked, "What's so funny?" and she showed me her screen, a text to her friend saying, "It's exactly what I expected, cheap and emotionally draining." Something inside me tore, clean and violent, like fabric ripping straight down the middle, but all I could manage was a whispered, "Stop." She looked annoyed and whispered, "I am stopping. You're overreacting." Then came the moment that crushed the last piece of denial I had been holding on to. As my aunt began sobbing during the eulogy, Mia leaned toward her phone again and typed, "I swear, if one more person starts crying, I'm walking out. This is unbearable." I stared at her profile, calm, detached, bored, and felt something cold spread across my chest, like grief giving birth to a different kind of pain entirely. And even as the service continued around me, all I could think was that I couldn't unsee this version of her, this version I wished I didn't recognize. After the funeral ended, I stepped outside to breathe, trying to shake off the humiliation that clung to me like smoke, but the cold air only made everything feel sharper. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and at first I ignored it, thinking it was another condolence message, until it buzzed again, and something in me finally said, "Check." It was my cousin, sending a single text, "You need to see this. I'm sorry." Then a screenshot popped up, and the moment I opened it, the world tilted beneath me. It was a group chat, Mia's family group chat, and they were mocking my father's funeral before it even ended. The first message was from her sister, "I saw pictures. Is that really the setup? Couldn't his family afford better?" Then her mother chimed in, Mia deserves someone who can provide a higher standard. This is embarrassing. But the one that hit hardest, like someone driving a nail straight into my chest, was Mia's own message, I'm dying inside. I told him to upgrade this but he's too cheap. Honestly, I can't wait until this is over. My hands shook as I scrolled through more comments, each one worse than the last, each one reducing my father's final moments to something they laughed about over their morning coffee. When Mia walked up beside me and asked, You ready to leave? I turned my phone toward her without saying a word. She blinked, then smirked, not apologized, not panicked, just smirked and shrugged. It's not that deep. My family just jokes around. You're being dramatic again. Her voice was flat, almost bored, and it felt like she'd just spit on his grave. I stood there staring at her, really staring, and for the first time I saw a version of her I'd never noticed, a coldness, a selfishness, a casual cruelty she didn't even bother hiding anymore. And in that moment, a terrible clarity hit me with full force. This wasn't just about a bad day or stress or misunderstandings. This was who she truly was. I didn't say a word on the drive back to her place. I just stared out the window, replaying every message from that group chat until my chest felt tight enough to crack. The moment we stepped inside, she tossed her purse on the couch and said, Are you done sulking now? Because we really need to get back to the wedding planning. Something in me snapped. I turned to her and said, My father was buried today, Mia. Buried. And you were mocking him while I was standing there trying to hold myself together. She rolled her eyes so hard it almost looked rehearsed, then crossed her arms like she was the one being attacked. You're overreacting. My family jokes about everything. It's not our fault you take everything so seriously. I felt my voice shaking when I asked, So it doesn't bother you that they called his funeral cheap? That you said you were dying inside because it wasn't up to your standards? She shrugged and said, I mean, it wasn't. And you have to admit, you didn't exactly splurge. The cruelty was so casual, so effortless, it made my stomach twist. I stepped closer and asked, Do you even respect him? Do you even respect me? And she fired back, Respect has nothing to do with it. You're drowning in grief and dragging me with you. I shouldn't have to suffer because your family is a mess. For a moment, the room felt smaller, like the walls were inching closer, and all I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator behind her. I finally managed, You could have just shown empathy. That's all I needed. She scoffed and said, Then maybe you should find someone who enjoys crying with you, because I can't do this emotional babysitting anymore. Her words didn't just hurt, they carved something out of me. And as I stood there, staring at the woman I thought I'd marry, I realized this wasn't the breaking point. It was only the beginning of something far worse. That night, after she disappeared into the bedroom without another word, I sat alone on her living room floor, staring at nothing while the weight of everything pressed down on me until my chest ached. I could still hear her last sentence echoing, I can't do this emotional babysitting anymore, and for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely ashamed for needing comfort after losing my father. When my phone buzzed, I expected maybe one person checking on me, but instead it was my mother, her voice trembling as she whispered, I don't think your father would have wanted you to suffer alone like this, and hearing her break made something inside me collapse completely. I tried to answer, tried to sound steady, but all that came out was a shaky, Mom. I don't know what I'm doing, before my voice cracked. She asked gently, Is Mia helping you through this? And I couldn't say a single word. Silence was my only answer, and after a long pause she whispered, Oh, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. When the call ended, the apartment felt unbearably quiet, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, and I realized just how alone I actually was. My friends had stopped checking in because every time they heard Mia's name, they pulled back like they didn't want to get dragged into whatever chaos they sensed, but I kept denying. Even my siblings tiptoed around the subject, confused why I was still trying so hard to hold on to a woman who treated my grief like an inconvenience. And that was the moment it hit me, the awful, suffocating realization that I had no one in my corner inside the home I thought I was building for my future. Sitting there on that cold floor, with swollen eyes and a hollow chest, I felt completely stripped of dignity, love, and reason. It was the lowest point I'd ever reached, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And yet, somewhere deep inside that darkness, something small and stubborn began to flicker, a shift I wasn't ready to name but could no longer ignore. I woke up on her couch sometime after sunrise, my neck stiff and my face swollen from crying, and for a few seconds I didn't remember where I was, until I heard Mia in the kitchen humming like the night before never happened. Something inside me shifted, quiet but irreversible, like a lock clicking open in a dark hallway. When she walked past me and said casually, "You should go home today. I need space to reset after all that drama," I just stared at her, feeling nothing and everything at once. For the first time since my father got sick, I wasn't drowning, I was observing, and what I saw was a woman so detached, so self-serving, she couldn't recognize the wreckage she'd caused. That clarity hit me with an almost painful sharpness. My life wasn't falling apart because I was grieving, it was falling apart because I was grieving with her. While she scrolled through her phone, smiling at something someone sent, I walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub with my hands shaking, not from pain, but from an emerging sense of direction. I whispered to myself, "This ends now," and just saying it out loud felt like oxygen after months of suffocation. I opened my own phone and began scrolling through everything I had avoided confronting, screenshots, messages, timestamps, every moment of disrespect I had convinced myself was not that serious. Seeing it all lined up, undeniable and ugly, turned that flicker of resolve into something solid. Then I started making calls, first to my cousin to confirm the screenshots, then to my mother to ask if she could gather my family at her place in a few days. I kept my voice steady, calm, measured, and my mother didn't question it, she just said, "Of course," with a quiet strength I hadn't felt from anyone in weeks. By the time I walked out of that bathroom, Mia was sitting on the couch painting her nails, completely unaware that her entire world was about to shift. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to control return to me. 3 days later, Mia walked into my mother's living room with the same practiced smile she used whenever she wanted people to think she was the perfect fiancée, completely unaware of what she was stepping into. Both families were already seated, my siblings, my aunts, my cousins, and on the other side, her parents and sister, everyone thinking they were here to finalize wedding details, exactly as I'd told them. Mia slipped her hand into mine and whispered, "Try to look happier. This is supposed to be a celebration," and the irony nearly made me sick. I gently pulled my hand away, and she gave me a confused, irritated glance, like I was embarrassing her on purpose. My mother placed a comforting hand on my back as I stood up, the room settling into a quiet, expectant stillness. And for the first time in weeks, I felt grounded. I started slowly, telling everyone how grateful I was for their support, how difficult the past months had been, how losing my father had torn something out of me. But then I added, "I need to share something important before any wedding planning continues," and a tension rippled through the room. Mia shot me a warning look, her eyes narrowing, but I continued. I opened the folder in my hands, printed screenshots, transcripts, every cruel message, and said, "While I was grieving my father, this is what was being said behind my back." Gasps echoed as I read out loud, her mother calling the funeral embarrassing, her sister joking about upgrading before the wedding, and then Mia's own message, "I'm dying inside. This funeral is so cheap." Mia jumped up, her voice sharp, "Stop it. You're twisting things. This is private," but I held up a hand. "Private?" I asked quietly. "You mocked a man who couldn't defend himself. And then you mocked me for mourning him." The silence that followed felt like the whole room had stopped breathing. Then, with my voice steady and clear, I said, "I'm calling off the wedding. Effective immediately. I won't bind myself to a family, or a woman, who disrespected my father in his final moments." Mia's face crumpled, her confidence shattering in front of everyone. But I wasn't done yet. The moment the words "I'm calling off the wedding" left my mouth, Mia's entire expression collapsed, shock first, then panic, then something almost feral as she grabbed my arm in front of everyone and hissed, "What are you doing? You're humiliating me." I pulled my arm back gently but firmly, and the room felt charged, like every person was holding their breath, waiting for what came next. Her mother shot up from her seat and snapped, "This should have been handled privately. You didn't have to make a scene." But before I could respond, my sister stood and said, "He didn't make the scene. You did the moment you mocked our father." The truth of that landed so hard that even Mia flinched. I could see the realization dawning across the room, people who once adored her now looking at her like they were seeing her for the first time. Mia's voice cracked as she turned back to me. "Baby, listen, please. I didn't mean those things the way they sound. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking." Her mascara streaked as tears finally spilled, but for the first time, they felt like a performance instead of remorse. I answered quietly, "You meant every word. And you weren't stressed, you were annoyed that my father's death wasn't convenient for you." She shook her head desperately, reaching for my hands as if physical touch could undo the damage. "We can fix this. We can delete the messages, explain it to everyone, start over, please. Don't leave me like this." Her parents chimed in again, trying to blame grief, miscommunication, anything except their own cruelty, but every excuse dug the hole deeper. One of my cousins, usually the quiet one, said, "You don't get to disrespect a man in his coffin and then cry when the consequences show up." The room fell into a thick, unforgiving silence. And as Mia clung to me, begging and apologizing in frantic whispers I no longer believed, I felt something unexpected wash over me, not anger, not heartbreak, but clarity. The kind that comes right before the final cut. After everyone left, I stayed behind in my mother's living room, sitting in the same chair my father used to claim during family gatherings, and for the first time since he passed, the air felt still, painful, but calm. Mia had stormed out with her parents, still crying, still pleading, still insisting we fix things before the story spread. But I didn't follow her. I didn't even flinch when my phone buzzed over and over with her name lighting up the screen. Instead, I muted everything and drove to the cemetery, the sky dimming into a soft gray that matched the hollow ache in my chest. When I stood in front of my father's grave, I placed my hand on the cold stone and whispered, "I honored you today. I finally stood up for you, and for myself," and the wind felt like the only response I needed. I stayed there until the silence wrapped around me like something protective instead of suffocating. On the drive home, Mia sent voice notes, her voice trembling, then angry, then pleading again. "We can fix this. Don't throw everything away. You're overreacting. Please, I can't lose you." But the strange thing was, I didn't feel pulled toward her anymore. The emotional tether that once kept me tied to her had snapped cleanly, leaving nothing but space where chaos used to live. When I got home, I blocked her number, her family, every thread that connected her to my life, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I took a full breath without feeling crushed. In the days that followed, word spread fast, people talked, people judged, and people distanced themselves from Mia the same way she had distanced herself from compassion. My mother hugged me and said softly, "Your father would be proud," and for once, I believed her. Grief still lived in me, but it wasn't poison anymore. I wasn't healed yet, but I was finally free. And as I closed the door on that chapter, quietly, without theatrics or revenge, I realized that sometimes the most devastating justice is simply walking away and letting the truth echo in the silence you leave behind.